Welcome everyone to the October edition of Chamber Chat. We're excited that you've chosen to listen in today. We have a great conversation. I'm here with Ward 7 Councilmember Stephen Tyler Holman. Stephen's also our Mayor Pro Tem, and we're excited to be able to chat with him a little bit this month. Stephen, thanks for joining us.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me, Scott. I appreciate you stopping by.
You betcha. So to begin with, from day one, I remember when you ran, it was Stephen Tyler Holman.
Yes.
Okay, so there's a famous lead musician, singer. Tell me about that.
So my dad's favorite band of all time, maybe a rock band at the very least, is Aerosmith. His favorite rock frontman of all time is definitely Steven Tyler. And I'm his only child, his only son, and so he wanted to name me Steven Tyler. And so it's spelled differently. My dad's name is actually Stephen also, but he spells it with a V. And so he spelled mine with a PH so that I wouldn't be Stephen Jr., I guess. And so, yeah, my full name is Stephen Tyler Holman, named after a famous rock singer. And really for most of my life, I went by the name Tyler. That's what my family calls me still. And friends that I've had for a really long time still call me that. But some of my friends call me Holman.
Okay.
Friends that I played football with in high school, like all of our last names would be taped on our helmets during practice, so everybody would call each other by their last names. But about 12 years ago or so, I started going by my full name. I always had a hard time remembering other people's names, so I felt if I went by my full name, people would more easily remember my name.
Oh, very good.
And it definitely caught on, and now people call me Steven. Some call me Steven Tyler, some call me Tyler, some call me Holman. So there's all sorts of different names. Some people call me Stefan because they see the PH and they think it's Stefan. So I've got a bunch of different ones now, I guess, but that's kind of the origin of it.
That's awesome. Well, I'm a big Star Wars fan, and so when we had our first son, I really was leaning towards Han, but my wife was like, no. So it's Luke. That's his name.
Han would have been really unique, though.
Would have been unique, right? Yeah. And we have a little girl. We talked about Leia, but it didn't go very far. So.
Han Luke Martin.
I know. It would have been great, right?
Yeah, Leia Martin.
Good stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, so you mentioned playing football in high school. Norman's your home, right? I mean,
Yes.
This is where you've been almost your entire life.
Yes. Yeah.
Raised here, but you spent a little bit of time out of the state, but most all your years have been right here in Norman.
That's right, yeah. My dad's from Norman, my grandfather is from Norman, and my great-grandfather spent almost his entire life in Norman. Came here as a kid. So,
wow.
in the early 1900s. When I was about 4 years old, my dad got remarried to a woman that lived in Dallas. And we ended up moving there to where she lived, and we lived in Dallas, Carrollton for 4 years. I went to kindergarten and first grade actually at a Dallas public school.
So what was your transition as far as your schools go here? Where'd you go to elementary, middle, and high school?
So in second grade is when we moved, right before second grade is when we moved back to Norman. And so I started school second grade at Kennedy, Miss Trimble. And then second, third, fourth, fifth grade at Kennedy, and then Irving Middle School, 6th, 7th, and 8th, and then Norman High all through freshman, sophomore, junior year, and then the first semester of my senior year, I went to Moore High School, actually.
Oh, wow.
And then once the semester was over, I transferred back to Norman High.
You're in your mid-30s, but that's 3.5 decades of seeing Norman.
Yeah.
Maybe tell us a little bit about how Norman's changed throughout those years.
Well, it's physically changed. I mean, you can see things that are different about the city, whether it's different, streets have been redone. West Lindsay Street is different now. The highway is different now. I-35, Highway 9 is different now. So structurally, the city looks different. And development-wise, there's a lot of new structures in the city that we've seen. The city is a bit more expansive than it was when I was a kid. New neighborhoods that didn't exist even when I was in high school, 15 years ago now. So even just since then, I've seen a lot of things change in Norman. And most of it, I think, has been pretty good. For the better, I look back and I say, that looks a lot. I think the city looks a lot nicer than it did 10 years ago, 20 years ago. And some people don't necessarily like change or the way things may be going. And people come up and say that to me all the time. Like, it's just not the Norman I grew up in. It's not the same Norman I grew up in. And I often will say, well, I bet when you were a kid, there were some older folks in town that were saying, this just isn't the Norman I grew up in. Things just keep changing. And I don't like it. So I think that's probably always been the case. Is every generation looks back and thinks, things were better here, and that's probably everywhere too. Things were better when I was growing up. It's different now. It's So, and I suspect, in 20, 30 years, many of us might be looking at things back in 2019 were so good. I can't believe we're, I don't know, So, it's been, as I've gotten older and now I have more memories that go on. I can remember things from 30 years ago. And it's just interesting seeing how things are changed, or driving around town and saying, I remember that thing that used to be right there. And, so it's interesting.
Things evolve and change, and I think you're probably right that we all look back to that golden era, whatever it was in our own lives. But I think we're hopefully setting the stage for the next generation to have it even better than we have it, and so we're developing a community that is going to be even better in the future. I hope that's the case. So now you mentioned you kind of started a passion for city planning, public service when you were really a young kid. Talk to me about how you got interested or engaged in Norman politics, Norman, City Hall. Talk to me about that.
So I really started watching it on TV, the city council meetings on Channel 20 when I was probably in about 6th grade. I would stay up late. I always kind of had a little bit of insomnia, and I would stay up late. Being raised by a single dad, my dad would, and I was the only child too, so my dad would go to bed pretty early. He had to go to work early in the mornings, and the company he worked for actually started in Norman, here in downtown Norman, and then grew so big that it moved to OKC because there wasn't a big enough office space in Norman at the time, back in the mid-90s, I guess. So my dad was having to then commute originally from like Lindsay Street to Main Street. Now he's having to go to west of Whitewater. So he'd have to get up early, and so I'd stay up late, usually watch TV, and I'd start watching city council meetings and school channel. Channel 18 and Channel 20. It was actually Channel 29 back then, but Channel 18, Channel 20. And my dad got remarried to his third wife when I was in 6th grade, and it was quite a change for me. It went from just being my dad and myself to now having a stepmom who had 4 kids.
Okay.
And my dad and I lived in an apartment close to campus, and now we were living in this house in a suburban subdivision like East 24th and Lindsay. So a really different setting for me. And so I found myself just, watching meetings and stuff to, I don't know, not necessarily clear my mind of things that were going on, but it was just something I felt attracted to. And partly because I spent a lot of time as a kid playing with Legos and playing a game called SimCity on Super Nintendo. And I even had a Lego town in my room that took up the whole floor in the room. So I didn't have a bed in my room. I slept on the couch, actually, by choice. And my dad let me because my Lego town took up the whole floor in the room. So I just was always fascinated by that type of stuff, by buildings, by, like I said, about skyscrapers and tall buildings in Dallas and stuff. And just how cities work. And so watching city council meetings on replay, I didn't have any idea who the council members were or how they got there or anything about politics at all. My dad's not political at all, really. So I just watched it because you would see presentations for development projects or a road construction project that was going on or something like that. And I just thought that was real fascinating. And I could say, there's going to be a Taco Bell going in over there or something, or some new business was going in. And I just thought it was cool to know about that
Yeah.
before other people knew about it. And so that's how I got into it. And then when I was in high school, a senior in high school at Norman High, the last semester of my senior year, looking for some credit hour classes that maybe wouldn't be too hard, but leadership was one on there, and I got in that class. It was taught by Miss Murray Quinn, whose husband Dan Quinn and served on city council, and was actually the only principal to be the principal of both Norman High and Norman North. And so I knew who he was, and taking her class, one of her requirements was to go to a school board meeting and to a city council meeting. And so that was the first time I ever went to a council meeting in person. Also in high school, I was on the school channel, Tiger Den. And one of the video assignments I did one time was I tried to interview the mayor of Norman. And I tried to interview my council member. And that's when I found out council members didn't actually work at City Hall or have offices. And then we just went to City Hall and we were like, yeah, we're from Norman High, we'd like to see the mayor. And they were like, well, the mayor isn't actually here. He's got an office, but he doesn't actually work here. And we were like, oh, okay. So that was the first time I really got starting to understand about what does the city council do. And there were a couple members of council when I watched on TV whose names stood out to me, like Stawicki, Pipes, and David Ray. And I remember I would listen to David Ray talk, and I was like, yeah, that guy's really smart. I really like what he's saying. And then when I was a senior in high school, my friend and I were at a grocery store here in Norman one day, and I saw David Ray, and I told my friend, I said, hey, that guy's the city council member. That's David Ray. And I walked up to him and I said, hey, you're Councilmember Ray. And he said, unfortunately, yes. And so that was the first time I ever got to meet a council member in person, and I guess that was a preview of what it might be like sometimes. So that's how I got into it and how I started going to the meetings. And then about when I was about 2008, that presidential election year, is when I started really getting interested in politics or policy and what being a Democrat or Republican meant, because I had no idea what I believed in at all. Like I said, my dad's not political. My dad likes to cook out and watch sports, and so I didn't really know what Democrats were, Republicans were, and elections and all that stuff. But 2008, I got really interested. I voted for the first time that year, and I started going to the council meetings on a regular basis then. And then I worked on a couple campaigns helping my council member. I lived in Ward 4 at the time, and helped my council member, Carol Dillingham, run for re-election. Mayor Cindy Rosenthal was running for re-election. I went and delivered some signs and stuff like that on my bike. I had no idea what I was doing really, but I just got involved that way, and was really involved in the music and arts community here in Norman, booking bands and doing things like that. So I really got to know a lot of people, and became a familiar face at City Hall. And then people started asking me if I was interested in maybe running, and I was like, I don't think so. I'm really shy, not extroverted at all, really. I at all costs would avoid public speaking all through school. I was not in student council or anything like that. And although I played quarterback in football, I was not the Baker Mayfield type, as much as I wished I could have been like that. But I was not very vocal at all, or commanding, I guess you could say. And so the idea of running for a public office, knocking on doors, asking people for money, I didn't even want to ask my dad for gas money in high school. So asking people for money to run for an office was not something I would have thought I could do at all. But some people asked me to think about it, and they said, this Ward 7 seat is probably going to come up next year. Councilmember Cubberley's probably not going to run for re-election. He'd been on for 10 years at that point. Yeah. And I grew up in Ward 7, actually, around 12th and Lindsay Street. And so I was like, well, I don't know. Maybe if Doug Cubberley doesn't run again, I'll think about it. Because I like Doug, and I wouldn't want to run against a 10-year incumbent. That would be ridiculous. So, and then a few months later, he announced he wasn't going to run again. So I thought, okay, I guess so, maybe I'll try it. I was 26, had no idea what I was doing, no money, and almost won. Lost barely in a runoff by 21 votes. And so that kind of ignited the fire that, okay, maybe I could do this if I really got organized and got some help. So that kind of went from there.
So you lost the first election, but came back, won the second one. Now just earlier this year, you were reelected to your fourth term.
That's right.
You're the longest tenured council member, which historically has made you mayor pro tem, which is the position you're in now, which I think is fantastic. During your tenure, is there an issue or two, or maybe an idea that you've really championed or been maybe more interested in than some others?
Yeah, it's seems strange to some maybe, but it's not like a life or death issue. I could make an argument that it is a quality of life issue, but before I even ran for city council, before I even thought about running for city council, and growing up in Norman, I always thought the one-way Main Street was really strange. And so before I even ran, I started talking to people about, what if we converted it back to two-way? It used to be two-way and all these things. And when I first started talking about it 10 years ago or so, everybody told me no. They said, no, we've looked at it. We looked at it about 10 years ago. We looked at it about 25 years ago. It's been looked at. Just can't be done. The last study we did on it said it'd have to be 4 lanes, 5 lanes, and you have to get rid of all the parking, and it just can't be done. And so don't waste your time, basically. And so I didn't agree, and I had been reading about one-way streets and downtown areas and urban revitalization and how downtown areas were coming back, and suburban mall type places were dying out. They're real popular in the 80s and the 70s. The 80s mall movies and all those things. But that kind of model of retail was sort of dying out nationwide, and focus was going back towards these downtown areas that had fallen into disrepair. And we still had a really good downtown left with nice buildings that we could work with. And so I thought, this isn't impossible. We need to look at this again. And so it was something it wasn't like a main thing I ran on. I'm going to convert Main Street back to two-way, but it was a bullet point I had on my very first campaign material. Was, I think, conversion of Main and Gray Street back to two-way is something we need to do. And so once I got elected, I through the Community Planning and Transportation Committee, and actually through the Center City charrette process, that was the real turning point. That's when people really started listening more to me about it and agreeing with me, because the consulting firm we hired from Berkeley to come in and look at the Center City area, and basically we were seeing development happening in the Center City area that a lot of folks weren't necessarily real comfortable with, and it was under existing zoning and different things like that. So we looked at this particular area between Campus Corner and Main Street and said, okay, this area, what could we do here? If development's going to happen, what could we do? What could we put in place here that kind of guide it to more of a thing that we would like to see? And one of the first things that consultants from Berkeley, California, when they came and looked at the area, they said, well, first thing, your Main Street being one way, that's a problem. And if you ever want to see any real economic vitality and commerce and revitalization in your downtown, that's going to be one thing you're going to need to change. And like I said, I had been saying that, and that's when Mayor Rosenthal kind of changed. She had been like, I think it'd be a good idea, Stephen, but I don't think we can do it. She changed her mind. Jim Adair was someone who told me he liked the idea, but he owns a lot of properties on Main, and at the time didn't think, I don't think we can do it. And I told people, I said, well, we did it on Campus Corner, and they're like, well, that's different. That's a lot less traffic. And I was like, okay. And so, but that charrette where the firm came in and looked at it and said, that's something you guys really need to do, that kind of really started changing the tide about Main Street two-way. And so that's been like my personal pet project. And we haven't gotten that approved quite yet, but we did get the Gray Street two-way approved by voters back in April. And about 4 years ago, I was able to help push the council to approve funding for a study, an extensive study of Main Street and Gray Street, and not if they could be converted back to 2-way, but how it could be done, how much it would cost, how we would do it, and those types of things, and we did it. We did it. So we had the information that told us it can be done and how much it would cost, and we successfully got voters to approve the Gray Street part of it first, and hopefully in a few years after that gets done and people see how amazing it is and how improved Gray Street will be from a property value standpoint, from a commerce standpoint. After that, I believe that's going to happen based on everything I know about the subject and nationwide studies and other cities. So I think that Main Street will happen in the future. So that's been my one little pet project that's not necessarily life and death and wouldn't seem like a big deal to a lot of people probably, but it's been something I've always thought it was. I've always thought downtown Norman was the best part of Norman. It was always looked different to me, and in a good way too. I was like, I really like this area. Why do I like it so much? And when I see the old pictures of Main Street and things like that, and all the activity and the people, and it being 2-way, I just took that as an issue I wanted to not necessarily be my legacy, but.
Well, when you think about Norman's downtown, it's really unique compared to most large cities like we are.
Yeah.
Third largest city in the state. And love Oklahoma City and Tulsa, however much you love them. And they both have great downtowns, but they don't have a Main Street downtown like we do, right? Yeah. And for us to be able to have experienced the revitalization that's occurred in the last decade in downtown historic Norman is really cool. And that's a transformation that we've been able to see in our lifetime, right? Yeah. And I think that's pretty awesome. So the Chamber shares your passion for infrastructure. You mentioned earlier that you can make the argument for it being a quality of life. I agree with you. Clearly, it's public safety too. It's how you get around, how you get police, fire, ambulance services to where we need them, when we need them. School buses, make sure our school buses get around town, how we transport commerce around town. Yeah. So I think infrastructure is really important.
And how it looks is important. When you go to a city and the roads and the sidewalks are all busted up and overgrown and it looks dirty and run down, it's just not like, why would I want to come bring my business here?
Right.
Or my family here?
Right.
But when you see a street that's been fixed up, it's nice, it's kept clean and nice too. So that's the big important thing. You build these new stuff, you got to maintain it. That's always been a problem for not just Norman, but everywhere. But it really makes a difference. It's investment in just a new sidewalk on a street can bring in multiple new businesses just by having a new sidewalk that looks nice and isn't all busted up. We've seen that on our Main Street where the city has put in the new infrastructure, put in the new sidewalks, put in some new street lights, some benches, some trash cans that look nice and get emptied regularly, and the businesses start coming. And so it really does make a difference, and the attention to detail really makes a difference. And that's a little bit of my OCD that gets into that, because I'm really sometimes a little over about it.
Well, we'll look forward to working with you on the next infrastructure project, because it's really important. But an issue that's been on our kind of local agenda for at least a year, if not more than a year, is the development process. And so the city, I think it was earlier this year, late last year, engaged a consultant to look at the development review process, which we've been very supportive of, and we really applaud the city council and city leadership for taking that initiative. We're kind of close to the end of that process. So you want to give us an update and maybe share with us where we're at and where you think we may be going from here?
So looking at how things have been done always in Norman, and thinking, is this the most efficient way to do it? Is it the best way to do it? Is it fair? Are these fees that we're assessing for permits, is if we're charging this business that fee, are we charging the same fee for this business? Or this has come up with the recent cannabis discussions about how to apply permit fees to that, and how do we apply it to other business entities? So are we being consistent? So really, it's been an effort to review our entire process system and how it's applied to all businesses, and seeing where are we deficient, what can we do better, what is good, what about our system is better than the other cities, what do people like about it, and how can we expand on that. And so I don't know exactly what the end result will be and what changes might be made, but I think everyone understands there are issues with how things have always been done. And after a while, you need to reevaluate how things have always been done and see if that's the way. Because I think Norman shouldn't be known as a place where it's hard to do business. We have 5,000 new college freshmen in this town every fall. That's a pretty attractive reason to move to Norman, right? Move your business here. And so making it not necessarily a streamlined process that's like we'll just move all the stops and do whatever we can to get you in here, because we also want to have a quality product too. We don't want buildings that are not properly done, or are going to fall apart and things like that. So you want to be attentive to detail, you want to be thorough, but you don't want to be oppressive, and you don't I don't like this idea that one inspector has a different list of things than another inspector, criteria or whatever for approval. And or I've heard stories about well, it doesn't say I have to do this, but they're saying they're not going to approve it unless I do it. Yeah. And so that just shouldn't be happening ever. And so I don't know if this process is going to weed out all those problems, but I'm hoping that we're going to be able to identify them and make some changes that are going to be positive.
We have a lot of small business owners on the city council right now. Yes. And so I've been encouraged by their experience and the examples they've had in their own businesses. So I'm hoping that some of that will roll over into the implementation of this process. And we're really close. That's why it's exciting that recommendations will be coming forth soon, and then the council is going to be able to act on those. The chamber is real excited to be able to work with you guys. And as we kind of close up our conversation today, as we maybe reach out to a few thousand, thousands of people, we've got nearly a little over 1,500 members now. Yeah. What are some ways that Norman Chamber members can partner with you and the rest of the city council to do good things for Norman?
Well, participating, not being, afraid to reach out to us about what's going on. I know sometimes people think, well, there's only 9 of them, and there's thousands of businesses in town, and my problem may not be important, or my council, I don't know my council member, or what. But I have people that reach out to me all the time that don't live in Ward 7, that they know that I've been on the council a long time, or they know I'm from here, and I know a lot about it, so they'll reach out to me with a question or something. But just not being apprehensive about reaching out and letting us know about if there's an issue that's causing a problem for your business, or maybe things are good and you'd like to see us expand whatever we're doing that's good about it. But and like you mentioned, having a lot of members on the council that are familiar with business operations and running a business or owning a business is really helpful. But just hearing from people, one of the big issues is businesses that are open at nighttime. We've had that discussion with the Downtowners Association before. Some of the meetings are like early morning, so some people that own bars or whatnot are like, I'd like to, but I'm up till 3. And I can relate a little bit because I do work one night a week at the deli on Campus Corner as a door guy. So last night I worked, so I was up till I got home about 2:30 a.m. And so and it's not real physical labor. I'm just standing at the door checking IDs, but I still got to be up. And but there's people that are out at nighttime. There's businesses that are open at nighttime that sometimes feel like they aren't very well representative. They don't have anybody to talk to because nobody's awake at nighttime. For me personally, my door's always open here at the Friendly Market or at the deli or wherever. Anybody from anywhere in Norman can stop by and share with me your thoughts about what's going on, and if I can help in any way. When I see a building go up that I approved or a policy that I worked on get implemented, and I see it helping people have a better life here in Norman, it's really makes it worth the hard decisions or the long hours that we have sometimes.
Well, your passion comes through on a regular basis for just how much you care for the community, which we really appreciate. And we also appreciate your accessibility and your commitment to the community as a whole. So thank you so much for that. We really appreciate it.
Absolutely, I appreciate it.
And thanks for your time today. It means a lot to us and to our members. So thank you for having us today.
Anytime. I'm happy anytime.
Okay, awesome.
Thank you.
Well, everybody, thanks for tuning in today to this month's Chamber Chat. We're excited that we were able to be with Councilmember Holman today to talk about him, his vision for our community, and how you, as a member of the Chamber of Commerce, can work with him and the rest of the council to make Norman the best place in the country to live, work, and play. Now, I want to remind you about one event coming up, which on October the 31st, it's going to be our second Coffee with the Council from 8 to 9:30 at the Chamber. This is going to be with council members from Wards 4, 5, and 6. We hope to schedule another event in November with Councilmember Holman and Ward 8 and also the mayor. So be looking for more details on that. But until then, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you real soon.